of this Council on the length of interventions. And with that reminder given, I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the beginning, on behalf of my government, I would like to express our condolences to the people and government of Algeria for the tragic military plane crash that claimed the lives of 247 people. Second, I welcome the participation of the Secretary General in this very important session. I thank him for his comprehensive and accurate briefing that has clearly pointed that he and others in this Council did understand the title of this session, and he spoke in the manner that is commensurate with the threats to international peace and security in light of the allegations and accusations against my country and its allies. The ambassador of Sweden said that the use of chemical weapons is a war crime. This is true. I agree with him. My government agrees to this. However, my dear colleague, don't you think that war in itself is a crime and needs to be stopped and to be prevented? Perhaps this would be a very good title in a book by the Peace Institute in Stockholm, the Institute of SIPRI. Maybe this would explain to the member states that war in itself is a crime. My colleague, the representative of the United States, said that the Syrian chemical weapons that killed the civilians were used 50 times. That's what she said. And 50 times chemical weapons were used, and it only killed 200 civilians. Imagine this. The Syrian government has reversed the course of the global terrorist war against my country by killing 200 civilians only, after having used chemical weapons 50 times. Isn't this talk of those who are amateurs? This is good for DC Comics, Superman comics. Is this how the White House strategizes? That a certain government uses chemical weapons 50 times to kill 200 civilians? How is this possible? How is this logical? And then my colleague, the United States of America, did overlook one important thing, that her own country, on board of the Kipri, has destroyed our stockpiles in the Mediterranean, along with ships by Denmark and Norway. Their own experts in the U.S. delegation should have told her that Ms. Sigrid Kaag said in this chamber in June 2014 that there are no chemical stockpiles in Syria. Could they have simply forgot all of this? Those who think that military force, Western massive military force in the Eastern Mediterranean, is because there is a Sufi Western affection towards those vile terrorists in Douma. Those vile terrorists were chased out of the north, as you are aware, and they are now on their way to Saudi Arabia, and then they will be recycled into mercenaries working in Yemen, and they will be used in other battlefields, including Yemen. No, massive military forces in the Mediterranean does not target those terrorists, a handful of terrorists. It targets the state of Syria and its allies. This should be the topic discussed today in this session. My colleague, the ambassador of the United States, was not horrified that her country used 20 million gallons of orange agent in Vietnam in 1961 that claimed the lives and the injury of 3 million Vietnamese, and 400,000 children are born with a deformity due to the use of the orange agent used at the time. And she was not horrified by the killing of her forces of thousands of Syrians in Raqqa and thousands of Iraqis in Al Fallujah and Nusra using white phosphorus agents, which is a chemical weapon. Isn't this a war crime, my colleague, the ambassador of Sweden? I would like to read to you remarks of the former Defense Secretary of Britain, Henderson. And this is to my colleague from the British delegation. Mr. Henderson spoke of his country's and the United States' use of those chemical weapons in Iraq. He said, and I quote, "It is unbelievable that we would occupy a country, that's Iraq, to look for chemical weapons, and at the same time, we use chemical weapons against that very same country." End of quote. Mr. President, George Orwell, the well-respected and ethical author in the West, says, "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." The truth that needs to be told today is that 3 permanent members of the Security Council are dragging the entire world once again towards the abyss of war and aggression. They seek to obstruct the work of the Council towards the maintenance of international peace and security, which is the main principle agreed on and adopted by our founding fathers when they adopted the UN Charter in San Francisco on the 26th of June 1945. And I would like to remind those and refresh their memory of paragraph 4 of Article 2 of the Charter, and I quote. And the ambassador of Bolivia read it, but I will read it once again. "All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the UN." End of quote. The truth that needs to be told today is that these 3 countries have a legacy based on fallacies and fabricated narratives to launch wars, and this is to occupy states and control their resources and their fate and force a change of their governments. And the truth that needs to be told today is that the entire world and this particular council stand witnesses to the invasion, occupation, and destruction of Iraq based on a U.S. lie that took place in this very chamber 14 years ago. They are witnesses to France's exploiting this council to destroy Libya under the pretext of protecting civilians and ending the future of an entire people for a very simple reason. That is, their president at the time, Sarkozy, wanted a cover-up for his financial corruption, and this is an ongoing case, and you're all aware of it. However, some countries still fall for such lies that are promoted by these very same states to launch an aggression against my country, Syria. God bless the days when France, in this very same council, had their policies of Charles de Gaulle, and they refused the aggression of the US and the UK against Iraq. We lament those days. France does not now respect de Gaulle, and now it is one of the countries that launch aggressions against other countries. The truth that needs to be told today, Mr. President, is that the international community has not sought to rein in those who are reckless and undermine international relations and subjected to disasters since the establishment of this organization. Our biggest fear is if the international community does not come together to end the abuse of those who are reckless, this would effectively declare this organization dead in a very similar circumstance to that that led to the ending or declaring the League of Nations dead. The truth that needs to be told today is that after the failure of the US, Britain, and France and their proxies in the region, in our region, after they failed to achieve their objectives in Syria through providing all forms of support to the armed terrorist groups, we see them today tweeting and bragging about nice, new, and smart rockets and missiles and defying international legitimacy through this council. And they are dispatching warplanes and fleets to achieve what their terrorist tools failed to achieve over the past 7 years. The truth that needs to be told today, Mr. President, is that the Syrian government did liberate hundreds of thousands of civilians in eastern Ghouta from the practices of the armed terrorist groups that used them as human shields and did hold them hostage over years and prevented any medical or food assistance from reaching them. It used their schools, homes, and hospitals as military bases to launch attacks against 8 million civilians in Damascus. The truth that needs to be told today is that some reckless people are pushing international relations towards the abyss based on a fake video prepared by the terrorist white helmets based on instructions by Western intelligence. The truth that needs to be told today, Mr. President, is that the international alliance, the so-called one, used its warplanes to serve ISIL to obstruct the victories of the Syrian Arab army and its allies against this terrorist organization. This international alliance made the White Helmets its media division that fabricates and falsifies in the benefit of this terrorist organization of Al-Qaeda. My government took the initiative to invite the OPCW to dispatch a fact-finding mission to visit my country and the alleged site of the incident. We provided all facilitation for the team to work in a transparent and accurate manner. They are supposed to start their work in a few hours. This invitation comes from our diplomatic experience and trust and power, and not because we are weak or afraid of any bullying or threats. The Syrian Arab Republic condemns in the strongest terms the three governments threatening to use power in a flagrant violation of Article 1 of the UN Charter that identifies the purposes of the UN towards the maintenance of international peace and security and the suppression of acts of aggression and other breaches of the peace. Mr. President, with the exception of the United States, Britain, and France, we all understand that the Security Council is the body in charge with the maintenance of international peace and security and should stand against attempts to impose the law of the jungle and the rule of the powerful. But some member states think that the UN is just a business that works based on market rules and the supply and demand principle, and exploiting the fate of peoples, or uses it as a podium for cheap shows and investing in more lies. This actually is a truth that disappoints peoples of the world. We're not reinventing the wheel here. The history of our relations with these countries is filled with agony, pain, and bitter experiences, and their very well-known aggressive and hawkish policies. What is another truth, and what is more important as a shocking truth, is that the silence of the majority vis-à-vis these aggressive policies is not collusion, but it is out of fear from their political blackmail and arrogance and economic pressure and their aggression, as they do not blink when they go after anyone who tells the truth. In conclusion, Mr. President, those three countries, the US, Britain, and France, if they think they can attack us and attack our sovereignty, at the time we would have no other choice except applying Article 51 of the Charter that gives us the right to defend ourselves, the legitimate right to defend ourselves. This is not a threat, this is a promise. This is a promise. We would not let anyone attack our sovereignty. Why do I say this is a promise? I say this because George Washington, the US leader, said some very important words 200 years ago, or even more than 200 years ago. He said, and I quote, "Gentlemen, shall I tell you about a sound that is higher than the sound of the cannons? It's the sound of the truth that emanates from the heart of a nation that wants to live free." End of quote. We in Syria also have leaders like George Washington and prominent personalities, and they are doing the same thing. They're protecting the unity and sovereignty of their own country. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab